Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the panel discussion on gender accuracy in Bible translation. For the past 2 years, this team of Bible scholars has been working together on a project for CBE, reviewing more than 60 passages throughout the Old and New Testaments, most often used to denigrate women. As a part of this project, and through a collaborative process, they've also been working together to propose new translations, more gender accurate translations of each of these passages, along with providing tools to help all of us understand how to read these often misused passages. There's a lot of excitement about the panel this group gave at the 2019 Houston conference. And so because of that, we are excited to have the opportunity to hear a little bit more from them about gender accuracy and Bible translation and just the process of working on this project since 2019. First, I will introduce the panelists and then we will jump into the questions. So on the Old Testament team, we will hear from Havilah Dharamraj, Dr. Havilah Dharamraj, Dr. Boaz Johnson, Dr. Diphus Chemorion. Absent and very much missed from today's meeting is Old Testament professor Dr. Eunny Lee, who couldn't be here today. From the New Testament team, we will hear from Dr. Caryn Reeder, Dr. Alice Yafeh-Deigh, Dr. Cynthia Westfall, Dr. Phil Payne, and Dr. Jeff Miller. So to start, we'll lead off with sort of probably the first question we should ask in a situation like this. What does gender accuracy even mean in the context of Bible translation? And is it different from gender inclusivity? And Cindy, if you would start us off.
Patterns of grammar, words, and expressions that involve gender are significantly different in English than they are in Greek or Hebrew. English tends to reflect a person or thing's natural gender or biological gender. If you say she, you pretty much mean a female. Whereas in Greek, Greek tends to have formal gender, what we call formal gender, that often has no association with a person or thing's biological gender. Therefore, when translations simply translate, say, the masculine gender from Greek to English, the meaning is often distorted just by definition. Gender accuracy means rendering the meaning of grammatical gender words or idioms or expressions in the Greek or Hebrew into their equivalent meanings meanings in English. That just scratches the surface, but I think that'll get the ball rolling. That is, if you just transfer gender formally from masculine, feminine, and Greek has neuter to English, you're going to distort something.
Just like to say, here's a really concise way to think of it. A gender accurate translation conveys accurately the gender reference of the original text.
I'll just quickly add that a lot of times when someone disagrees with what Cindy has said or with what we're trying to do, they will recast it as gender neutrality and then attack that idea instead of attacking our agenda of gender accuracy.
I was wondering, Jeff, if you could go back to the gender neutrality versus gender accuracy and maybe give an example of what that might look like.
Yeah, I can say a little bit more. And I think Boaz and Diphus are ready to speak as well. So I think that the agenda of a person who knows that we are interested in gender accuracy, but instead characterizes us in the interest as if we are interested in gender neutrality, it's a strategic move to say that we have a social agenda as opposed to our primary agenda, which is to render Hebrew and Greek texts accurately.
One of the person who has influenced me the most in Bible translation is a woman by the name of Pandita Ramabai. who translated the Bible during the last pandemic, which lasted in India for close to 20 years, is when she translated the Bible. And what I learned from her is the whole idea of gender accuracy being both related to the original languages, which she learned so well, Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek, but she was also very conscious of how gender-oriented words were received in her own culture. So I would say that, this is both. How are gender-related words found in the original text, and then how is it translated into Marathi, is the language in central India that she translated the Bible into. And I learned a lot from that translation. My goodness, that woman was way, way beyond our time. Thank you.
Just want to add that, yes, it is true that when we talk about gender accuracy, some languages don't suffer from that as English does. Like my mother tongue, I wouldn't worry about the pronoun reference. However, gender accuracy goes beyond just tackling issues of pronouns to also looking at connotations, looking at roles, looking at cultures, looking at capabilities. So when we are doing a gender accurate translation, we are looking at all those aspects of translation, so that we look at the functions, the roles, so that it is liberative, so to speak. We liberate genders that will be hidden, both of them, either masculine or feminine. It's a balance. Thank you.
This conversation of sort of the wider picture of what gender accuracy is, how it extends beyond just pronouns into culture, into sort of conveying what the text actually is saying, leads well into the next question. So I think we are all familiar with the English Standard Version, the ESV. And I believe that the ESV translators, people who like the ESV, would argue probably that it is gender accurate, that it accurately conveys in their mind what the text is saying, because it literally translates what the languages are saying in the masculine and feminine, in pronouns and beyond. As some defenders of the ESV themselves have said, the ESV doesn't remove patriarchal language from the Bible. It doesn't change the gender of pronouns, simply for, as Jeff said, a social agenda. And so I think it's probably safe to say that most of you on this panel would probably agree that the ESV isn't always gender accurate. I mean, we wouldn't be working on this project if we thought there was a perfect translation out there. So where is the disconnect for you, and why would other translations like the ESV maybe not be or are not as gender accurate as they claim they are or say they are? And Havilah, if you could start us off.
Sure. Let me talk first about translations in general, for those of us who might not know. Translations can be either literal, formal, or they can be dynamic. The difference between these two philosophies of translation is that the formal translation is word for word, whereas the dynamic is more meaning for meaning. Now, we all know that word for word is not necessarily the best way to go about any translation. For example, especially if you took idiomatic language, kick the bucket. Try translating that into any other language in the world and let the receptor audience figure that. Similarly, let me give you an example from the Old Testament. Amos 4:6 is in the context of a judgment oracle, and in 4:6, this is how a formal translation, the ESV or any other, a formal translation might render it. I will give you cleanness of teeth in every city.
and lack of bread in every town. And you're thinking cleanness of teeth, God's going to provide toothbrushes. No, the idiom cleanness of teeth, or the language in the original is suggesting that people's teeth won't have anything even to pick. That's how empty stomached and hungry they're going to be, famine. And that's what it's describing. So we know that word for word is not necessarily always the best. Meaning for meaning, I think, conveys much more fruitfully the sense of the text from the then and there of the Bible to the here and now of those of us who are reading and appropriating and practicing the Bible. Just a quick word about social agenda. This whole business of, do we really need to be politically correct? I should say that in strongly patriarchal environments, societies, such as the one that I live in India, it's not just a matter of being politically correct, because the patriarchal language of the Bible is used for social injustice. It's used to lower the dignity of a good half of the population. It's used to coerce and to threaten. So it's much, much more than just being politically correct. And so this, the whole business of the patriarchal language of the Bible needs to be taken much more seriously. And I believe that's what we are trying to do.
Yes, thank you for that. As you were speaking, I was reminded of a conversation the New Testament team had recently on John 4:39, which is about the Samaritan woman at the well. And the text there refers to the people of her town believing because of her word, which she testified, saying yada, yada, yada. That's not a literal translation there. Interestingly there, if you look at the different translations that are available, the ESV, the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, and the New International Version all leave out the word of the woman. And so they simply say that people believed because of the woman's testimony. In our conversation about how to translate this, we moved back to including the word of the woman to really emphasize that this is her verbal testimony, that it's not just the testimony of her changed life or the way that she expressed her joy at meeting Jesus, as sometimes interpreters have taken it. And I think that's an example of what Havilah was saying, that our translation, to be accurate, needs to reflect what the text is actually saying about the way that women participated in the early church and the movement of Jesus' followers, their verbal testimony, the way that they spoke and used their words with authority. And in that sense, to be gender accurate is not just translating those pronouns and the specific words referring to male or female or men or women, but also thinking about the larger context and how we can draw emphasis and attention to the ways that women participated in the early church or in the people of Israel. That helps a reader today understand that this woman's word, just like Jesus' word, is what convinced the people in her town to believe.
The question, is the ESV a gender accurate translation? And the claim that it conveys the text like the original text in many, many crucial passages is simply not true. For instance, in the 11 verses about the qualifications for an elder or overseer, the ESV translation inserts into the text he, his, him, where there is no masculine pronoun in the Greek. So they are adding a masculine nuance that is not in the original text. Another example, they speak of Junia as being well known to the apostles. But the expression is outstanding among the apostles, and Paul is very clear that he does not grant status based on what other people think about you, the apostles included. Another example, in Ephesians 5, they separate the subject of the sentence and put the verb in a different paragraph. This is not literal translation. This is not being fair to the Greek. It's making a translation that is designed to separate the mutual submission of verse 21 from the submission of wives to their husbands, which is part of the same sentence, but separated into a different paragraph. I could go on, but those are 3 examples.
Yeah, yes, the ESV uses dynamic equivalence when it suits them, and that's often in these controversial passages. But what I wanted to do is, I see Jeff raised his hand, and I don't know what he's going to say, but he actually has done an intense study of how different translations, such as the ESV, have inserted the masculine when it isn't there, and I wanted to hear him expand on that.
Thanks, Cindy. The ESV, one thing that comes to my mind when I hear the question is that in their preface, which can be read at esv.org or in the front of one of their Bibles, says that they're committed to a male meaning component. If a word has a male meaning component, then they're going to, in English, use a masculine word. And there's several problems with that. 3 that come to my mind are, first of all, what Phil just said. One of the things Phil said is that if you say in your preface that we're going to translate male words with male words, and then you insert hundreds of masculine words that don't have a corresponding word in Greek or Hebrew, then you give the impression to your reader that they do. Secondly, male meaning components are not always meaningful in that way. If I said, for example, that my mom was a virtuous woman, almost no one listening to this would think, wait a second, vir in virtue is Latin for man. Your mom can't be virtuous because it's a masculine word. That's not the way words work. And thirdly, their stated commitment to spotting male meaning components. Sometimes the component they're talking about isn't male at all. So for example, whenever they encounter a word that has adelph, A-D-E-L-P-H, they'll make a masculine translation out of it, such as brotherly love. Even though adelph is also the first 2 syllables of the word for sister. It's not just the first 2 syllables of the word for brother. So a Greek person wouldn't see those syllables with, one of the many endings that it can have and just think, well, that's a masculine word. Sometimes it's actually a feminine word, but they still label it as a male meaning component. And that comes through in their translation choice.
One of the things I teach at a university, I take my undergraduate students and seminary students to other parts of the world to see issues more clearly. Sometimes, when we are talking about English Standard Version or New Revised Standard Version or something, people have already made up their minds largely. So what I try to do is I try to take my students to other parts of the world. And I want to go back to Pandita Ramabai, who's taught me so much. When she was translating the Bible, these very, very well-regarded high caste Christian scholars will come into her office and berate her for the translation that she was making, because they regarded the Marathi and the Hindi translation to be expressing gender issues very, very accurately. And she pleaded with them, and I've seen that in letters as well as in conversations that have been recorded. She pleaded with them with the words that, my brothers, please look at the blind sides that you may have that you are not able to see, even though you think you are doing justice to the gender issues here. Please give us a chance as women scholars, and she would just plead with them. Of course, it fell to deaf ears, but what an amazing woman that used that word. Look at the blind sides. And maybe in our English translations as well, we are not willing to look at those blind sides with regard to gender issues.
Thank you all for answering that question. And I will take this moment to plug, Boaz has written an article about Pandita Ramabai for Mutuality. So if you want to know more about her, you can look her up, obviously, on the internet, but you should start with Boaz's article that can be found on CBE's website. Thank you all for answering that question. I think it's important. I'm sure a lot of us listening don't know always the difference between gender inclusivity, gender accuracy, and I'm sure there's much more that could be said about that. But thank you all for taking that question, or those two questions. And I think this is a natural time to move on, actually, just to talking about the process of working together and sort of what you've taken away from this process. So we're going to move on to question number 4. Has anything surprised you as you've been working on this project? And Boaz, if you could actually jump in and lead this question.
Thank you so much again for this panel. This is so great. Did anything surprise me? I think this was such a beautiful experience. I come at translation more from a rabbinic perspective. That's my training, the translation techniques of ancient rabbis, as well as more modern translation scholars like Rosenzweig and Buber and Alter and Fox, amazing scholars who also, especially Alter and Fox, are looking at gender issues quite well. So I come at it from this perspective, and then going into the translation committee, I realized that I have my own blind sides, and I learned so much from a South Asian woman scholar like Dr. Havilah Dharamraj. I learned from an Asian American scholar like Eunny Lee, and an African scholar like Diphus Chemorion. That was just a pleasant surprise to me. And in the process, I went to Katie McCackern and I said, Katie and others, can I resubmit my translations? And so I came up with a new Boaz translation, which was in line with both my translation philosophy that I'd learned previously, and the process of learning from my sisters and my brother was such a beautiful, pleasant surprise to me. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to just say that I've been really pleasantly surprised, but happy at the same time, recognizing that in our group, that in the translation team, we all are hearing the word and understanding it differently. And but the beauty about it is that it is through discussion, the dialogue we have about the text, that we come to an agreement on what we can propose, that it can be read and understood across the continents, right? That process of coming to a decision together, collaborative decision about what translations we want to propose out there. That is the beauty of this work. It's really recognizing that we come to the text, right, with our pre-understanding, also affected by our social locations and contextual variables. So that is what I learned and really appreciate a lot, that we are honest about it and we bring it to the fore and we discuss with one another to come to a common translation that we can propose.
Thank you so much, Alice. Yes, there has been much lengthy discussion, and it's been a privilege to just even sit in on those discussions with you all. Jeff, did you have something to add?
Mainly just that Boaz and Alice have nailed it. I always feel informed and enriched and encouraged after our time together. And the thing that surprises me, and I think would surprise other people if they listened to our meetings, would be just how long you can go on about a seemingly small thing. And it's partly because we want consensus, if at all possible. We don't want a 3-2 vote just to move on. We want to understand each other. And the blind spots imagery that Boaz mentioned is helpful, a good way to think about it. We've all got them.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Moving on from that, I'm curious if for those of you who are currently teaching or have taught in the past, or even are just having conversations with other people, is there anything you've taken away from the last 2 years of work on this project and brought into your classroom or into conversations with others? And if so, what is that? And Alice, if you could lead us.
Yes, I've been very intentional in my classrooms to explain to students why the university wants them to use the NRSV translation rather than any other translation at APU, and also even at Princeton too. The required translation that is being used by the school is the NRSV. For many years, I just had it in my book list, and the students would buy it without explaining why. But for the last 2 years, I've been very intentional. The first day of class, explaining to students why the rationale for the university using that particular translation and why it's important for me for our class. Particularly one of the classes that I teach is an upper division class on women in the Bible. And a lot of the students who come to that class, a lot of them are women. And they come to that class with some sort of, they come to that class with, some of them see the Bible as tool for oppression, right? They come to the text as women. They don't see the women in the Bible, the issues of invisibility of women in the Bible. So when I tell them, first of all, when I explain to them the first day of class why we use NRSV, I make it to them that NRSV, again, as compared to ESV, will actually make the gender reference clear, right? Where the women are in the text are also addressed, those that NRSV tries to make it clear, even though if they want to get a more clearer visibility of women, they can go to NLT or other versions that do more progressive work towards that. But at least the fact of telling them that when you see in the NRSV translations that include not just brothers, but brothers and sisters, they are trying to clarify for the English readers those aspects of the Greek text that just had the male gender that referred to the entire community, both male and female. Then the NRSV tried to make that reference very clear. That it's not just the male group. This is a male and female group. So it allows the students to pay attention when they come to those texts where they are seeing some clarification of their presence as women also in the text. So that has become something that is very, very important to me. And even in the issue of invisibility, I have students, every time we come to the marker and pericope, they're always like, why would the people say the 5,000 or 4,000 feeding story? They said men, not including women and children. Were women and children not important? If they included women and children, are they like 20,000? Because we know in our modern time, when you go to Christian community, the women like 80% more than the men. So still there's questions there, but allow it, at least the translation from the NRSV allows for that conversation to begin, and then the class pick it up from there. So yes, the work for the past 2 years have been very instrumental in me being intentional in my classes to point issues of gender accuracy.
Thank you, Alice. Yes, I can confirm with you, even when I was in seminary, they didn't explain why I had to use the TNIV, NRSV, CEV only in probably as clear way as they could have and should have. I second that. Havilah, I see your hand up.
Right. What I've been able to take into my classroom is what surprised me, coming straight out of the text in our discussions. I hadn't realized, I think, the power of feminine similes and imagery, metaphors for God. I hadn't realized how potent those were. And so with hours of going around these and discussing these texts, I simply had to take them to class, and my students were even more gobsmacked than I was. And so I think, texts like Isaiah 42:14, the verse before in 13, the Lord will march out like a champion, on male language. He's going to be a warrior, shouting, raising the battle cry. But in the very next verse in 14, for a long time, I have kept silent, God says. I've been quiet and held myself back. But now, like a woman in childbirth, I cry out, I gasp, I pant. And to be able to take, and this is not just one single example, there are so many more, to take them to my class in which I am training missionaries and pastors, and to show them that God is truly, really other, beyond our limited categories of sex and gender, which even we are not able to properly figure out. To be able to show them God as the other, I think that has been a huge takeaway for my students, and I'm really hoping that they will logarithmically multiply what I've done in the classroom and take it out to wherever they go and be able to preach from these texts.
I see your hand, Boaz, but I'm wondering if we could move on to the question that the New Testament team. So I had posed a question originally to the group, wondering if there was anything they wanted to ask one another, because for those of you who don't know, the New Testament team is working separately from the Old Testament team. They're not working all together in one room. They're working separately. So I wanted to ask them if there was anything they wanted to ask the other team. And when we were talking about it before, a question did come up specifically from the New Testament team to the Old Testament team. And so in the interest of time, I think it would be good for us to ask that now. And I wonder if Caryn, you could ask on behalf of the New Testament team, just sort of lay out what the question is, what the discussion is, and maybe offer or give time for the Old Testament team to provide some feedback.
Yes, certainly. So in the New Testament team, we have an ongoing conversation, a friendly debate, if you will, over how to translate the term Son of Man in the way that Jesus uses it to refer to himself in the Gospels. There are a couple issues here. Number one, Son of Man maybe has more of a masculine idea that is not actually there in the Greek. So in the Greek, the term is actually son of a human, right? Son of anthropos rather than aner. So aner would be son of man, but it's actually son of anthropos, which means human being, person, humanity sometimes. There's also the question of how to translate this idiom which was originally Aramaic and then translated into Greek. And in the Aramaic and in the Greek, it really does mean something like the human being, right? A human person. Sometimes you could even replace Son of Man with I as a personal pronoun, and that would express what Jesus seems to be meaning when he uses the title Son of Man. But we have an issue here because Son of Man is the language that the church has been using for hundreds of years, and to change that translation we wonder if that could actually raise more questions about what does this term mean? How are we using it? What are we sort of challenging or changing the way that Jesus refers to himself by proposing a different translation? I think, Havilah, with what you've just said about drawing attention to the way that God is gendered differently through imagery in the Old Testament, that's a helpful parallel to the conversation that we're having over Son of Man. So just so you know, the translations that we have been debating include the human son, and the human one, or the human being. And we just, or simply keeping Son of Man would also be an option there. And so we're just wondering, from an Old Testament perspective, if you might have any insight into, we know that you're not actually translating any of the Son of Man passages in the Old Testament, but perhaps you can help us think through these options and consider how we might translate this in the New Testament.
Shall I jump in on
Please do, yeah.
Okay, and that is, you can add to whatever I have to say. The phrase "Son of Man" is particularly frequent in the book of Ezekiel, and we know here it's God addressing a human. It's the prophet Ezekiel who's the Son of Man consistently right through Ezekiel, and I know of conversations we've had where, in class that is, when we've thought to translate it as earthling, if not human. So Son of Man there in Ezekiel is certainly not a term that has anything much more than human, the humanness of the prophet, what he is. Now in Daniel, that's where I think probably the problem might lie. In Daniel, we have two places where you have Son of Man. In 8:17, it's used exactly like in Ezekiel, where a heavenly being is addressing the human prophet Daniel, Son of Man. Again, earthling, human one. But in Daniel 7:12, we have in a vision one like, it's a simile there, one like a Son of Man coming down with the clouds of heaven. And then you get the Ancient of Days business, which is very much in our praise and worship even. So here is where probably the phrase Son of Man might become a hot button phrase, one that we don't want to change in a hurry. But looking at the way it's translated right across, I'd say human one. I mean, maybe we don't want to do earthling. Maybe the human one, the human, that works just as well, because it's so much in consonance with the way the phrase is translated right across the Old Testament, in particularly Ezekiel and the other occurrence in Daniel.
That's a very interesting issue. I would say that in one of the mother tongue translations that we have done in Kenya, the team was doing a meaning-based translation, weekly Bible translators. And so with all the exegesis and all the research, usually there's no question with that, the understanding of what it means in Daniel, what it means also in Ezekiel, what it means when Jesus uses that term. But so the thing that we have to ask at the end of the day is the question of acceptability. So when we do translation, it is good to do thorough exegesis, as we have always done. But remember that translation must have a philosophy, and also we must have some techniques. And so with all our understanding of what Son of Man means, we must also ask ourselves, what about the audience? How do we support them? Because just that one word can actually make a translation to be rejected. In this particular language that I'm talking about, when we say Son of Man, the language would say, if you translate it in a literal way, it will mean like it's a bastard. It's not a person it's a bastard, it's not a genuine son born out of wedlock. However, when the translators went to the middle way of saying, let us call him a person from heaven, then it became a problem, because the people who are going to use this translation have already accessed the Bible in other languages. They have accessed it in Swahili, languages of wider communication. So at the end of the day, we had to draw a balance. And what is this balance? It is to go to almost close to the literal, but then support it again with, say, a footnote to kind of say, what does it really mean here? And that's when we say theories of communication, like relevance theory of communication, which would say you bring in the explicatures, try to help the audience understand, because some of the things, in translation it is give and take, take and give. That's what they say. And so yes, it's a very difficult one, but I would say that whatever the team agrees on, it would be necessary at the end of the day to have a good explanation of what does this really mean, because any other option might make the translation very odd and very, very unnecessarily questionable. Thank you.
Thank you, Diphus. I see your hand up, Boaz. I just wanted to mention for the audience that Alice did have to step out. It's been, as you can imagine, difficult to coordinate multiple schedules across time zones across the world. So thank you for bearing with us. She's sad she had to step out, but she had an obligation she had to go take care of. So Boaz, would you like to respond to what Diphus and Havilah added, and anything that you have to add to Caryn's question?
I'll be happy to do that. This is such a huge example of the wide diversity and the richness of our teams. I've learned so much from Havilah and so much from Diphus, and that's illustrated in their comments there. I want to add perhaps a little more to what I bring to the processes. Again, going back to Pandita Ramabai, I find it fascinating that the term Son of Man in the Bible Society of India translation, which is similar to what would be considered as more literal translations in English, use the word that only a high caste priest can adhere to. If only you are a high caste Brahmin, can you associate with that term, the term that is translated as Son of Man. And she says, no, I'm going to translate it as human being, because that's what happens. God becomes a common human being. That is so powerful. And the low caste girls and the low outcast people will look at that translation and say, that is the God I want. And that's what makes a difference in communities like in India.
I want to give now Cindy, Caryn, Jeff, and Phil a chance to respond. And Cindy, I see your hand up. I also saw you react. So why don't you go ahead?
Yes, and this is exactly how the issue has laid out. It seems to me that the committee does understand that it means human being, but we're concerned about perception. So I think one of the things we're going to need to do is look at who our audience is and what the audience can bear. And this is kind of behind it to say, wow, if we go out there and say human being, then will we come under harsh criticism? And so there's a translation theory called Skopos theory that says basically, your translation is determined in a large part by your audience. It's not just about, what's the most accurate, but how does it impact your audience? What will the audience accept? And I actually wrote something about this for the CEB translation, where we did say, I was on that committee, and we did use the term human one. I was one of the main people who pushed for that. I realized it got some pushback. And so I said, and so the question was, who were we trying to appeal to, and did we miss our target? And so one of the things that I think we need to do as a translation committee is be sure of who our target is, and you know, where would the offense lie, and can we bear the offense with whom it lies? I think that that's what we're looking at.
I'll add a little bit, you know, for the sake of those who will listen to this, just to give you a window into what we're doing. So one of the challenges, at least for me, is to continually, you know, wrap my mind around the mission, the task that we're doing. And so in this case, Son of Man, of course, occurs many, many times in the Synoptic Gospels. It occurs in John's Gospel frequently, and sometimes right there in the context with Son of God or with just Son. It occurs in Acts. It occurs in a particularly challenging translator's way in Hebrews. We've only got one, I think. This conversation arises from one occurrence of that phrase, which is not the Hebrews one that's quoting the Psalms. It's not one where Son of God is in the adjacent sentence. And so one of our challenges is to first answer the question, are we translating what it means in this verse, or are we trying to translate what we would do if we had to do it 100 other times? That's just one of the complications.
Phil, I see your hand up.
One thing that I find absolutely fascinating in going through the Gospels is how Jesus uses the expression, the Son of Man, or the human son, as a specific reference. It's not just general, and it's associated particularly with the authority of the Son, doing miracles, forgiving sins, but also with his salvific work in giving his life a ransom for many. The Son of Man. And I find the expression the Son of Man distracting. First of all, Jesus was not the son of a man. He had a virgin birth. And when Jesus speaks about you are my brother and my sister and my mother, he doesn't add, and my father. So here we have a specific reference to Jesus in his suffering for our salvation, which is dependent upon his humanity. So I find the human son a very effective way to do that avoids translating anthropos in a way that makes it masculine.
Okay, well, as a closing question, just the last, we only have a couple minutes left. I would be interested in hearing from all of you. I know a lot of you are teachers in addition to scholars, so I would be just curious for audience members who are listening right now and maybe don't have, they obviously don't have our translation proposals yet. They don't have what we're working on in front of them. So when they're reading their Bible, when they're sitting in church, listening to a sermon, when they're in Bible studies, do you have any recommendations or tips that you would give them as they're trying to pay attention to, is this accurate in the way it's conveying gender, as they're just sitting in church or in a Bible study? How can they engage with their Bible, the ones that they currently have, in that way? Diphus, if you could lead.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, there are just so many translations, and the congregations are very interesting in the sense that most of the time, the ordinary readers may not know what's going on in the text. And they would only be alert when there are those key biblical terms, if I may call the basic structure of the Bible, of the word that they have internalized. But when we get like what we are doing, we are sensitive to gender fairness, and we are also sensitive to common language. That means that when they hear like what we are doing, it registers much faster, very quickly. And so what we are doing is bound to have more acceptability than the older fashions, because language changes. After every 10 years, a language changes. So if we are current in our language and also in appreciating the gender justice and fairness, and being keen on proper representation of either gender, then you find that ours has high levels of acceptability. Thank you.
All right, Phil, I see your hand.
One thing that I have been amazed at is how often in the New Testament masculine forms are used to refer generically, not just to men, but also to women. And I have a friend who's actually a complementarian in his viewpoint, who is a specialist in the grammatical forms in the New Testament. He published the Analytical Greek New Testament. And I said, I challenge you to go through and look at the New Testament and see how many times there are generic masculines, masculine forms that either could or must apply also to women. He went through the New Testament twice and found between 7,500 and 8,000 generic masculines. That's almost one per sentence in the New Testament. It's extraordinarily common. And so when you ask the question, what recommendation do you give to a reader who's reading his New Testament? Be aware that when you see masculine forms in the text, that doesn't necessarily mean it's only men. In fact, the vast majority of them are intended in the language to convey a generic sense applying to men and women. And the prior gender throughout the Old Testament in Hebrew is the same thing.
Thanks, Phil. All right, Boaz, I see your hand.
Thank you. Well, one of the things I would like to recognize is that, you know, we are scholars of the Bible. We are scholars of the Hebrew Bible, Aramaic, and hieroglyphics, and all that, and Greek, and so we do come at the text from what we have been educated in. But I need to recognize that we also have our blind sides. And I would encourage the listening audience to learn from this experience that we have gained from each other. But what are the things where we are not looking at because we have our blind sides? Would you look at the text and send CBE your questions, because we want to learn from you. Thank you.
Yes, I know that it's one of the downsides of doing this panel pre-recorded is that we cannot field questions. And I know that that's a loss. So yes, please do. Right. And I see your hand up, Cindy.
Yes, I was going to say exactly what, well, not exactly what Phil said, but the same idea is to say every time the text says men and he, be a little suspicious and think about it, because in English, that means it's a reference to a guy, but in the Greek, often inclusive, which was my first point that I made. That's why it's inaccurate. And then secondly, what a point that Caryn raised when she talked about the women at the well is that be aware when women, and if I can say, be suspicious about how women are described. We have found over and over and over again that words are used to downplay really the strength, the assertiveness of women, where if this word applied to a man, it would be a strong word, it would be an assertive word. When it's applied to a woman, all of a sudden it conforms to gender expectations and stereotypes that are complementarian. And so when you hear women described in these translations, just realize that the impression that's being given may be downplaying the woman's strength and role.
All right, thank you. We have time for one more, and I see your hand up, Jeff, so you can close us.
Okay.
Close us out, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So to the question of just advice for readers, I would say if you're reading the Bible in big chunks, if you're like reading it through it in a year, or if you're praying through the Psalms or something like that, then choose a Bible that has publicly said that it is trying to be gender accurate. And that could be the New RSV, which Alice mentioned earlier, or more recently, the New International Version or the Common English Bible. Use those for your reading. And I think most of our listeners are doing that. Secondly, if you're not reading in big chunks, but you're studying, you're preparing to teach or to preach or to write a blog, or someone has come to you with a question about what does this really mean, then I would say use one of those Bibles I just mentioned on the center of your desk or your screen, and have 2 or 3 others. And the task now is to notice the differences, and then to the best of our ability to say, is that difference just, it's just synonyms, or it's just a different way to say it, or is there really something going on here? Are these 2 translations saying something different? And if they are, then you now have a job, right? Now you need to get into the commentaries, get into discussions with other teachers, etc. And then either way, whether you're doing the big reading from one translation or the focused reading from 3, 4, or 5, I would say read the preface of that Bible. I think that probably most people don't. Most people have never read the opening 10 pages of the NIV or the ESV, because those prefaces are very carefully written, and they are trying to tell you what their agenda is, and it's you should go into it knowing they'll tell you this is what we did and why we did it. All right. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you all. I just would like to reiterate what you said, Jeff. One of the best pieces of advice I got, one of the things I still tell people to do, having gotten my master's in theology, is to compare translations. We have all of these translations, compare them and see what different ones are saying about gender specifically, and then you can know a little bit. You get a little peek into the complexity, at least, of the text. I think that's a great piece of advice. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for taking time. One other thing, I wanted to highlight what Havilah mentioned earlier about feminine metaphor too. I think that's another thing I would like to bring up. I know she answered it for a different question, but I think that would be something that could be brought into this question too. Just pay attention to where God is not just being referred to in a masculine way, but also in a feminine way, I think, and highlighting that and talking about it, I think, is important. These are the things I've observed watching you all work. So thank you all so much for taking time this morning or this evening, depending on where you are in the world, to talk and put up with technical glitches and construction outside and all of that. And I'm sure that there will be lots of interest in the things that we've talked about. So I look forward to fielding that, and thank you all.